Pull your chair close to the fire. Let the shadows lick your back while I tell you a story buried beneath the California hills. The kind you don't find in books, only in the whispered breath of survivors, or what's left of them. Back in 1979, when the sun still burned gold over the Pacific, and every van on the highway looked like freedom, there were two men prowling the edges of paradise. They didn't wear masks. They didn't need to. Evil like theirs doesn't hide. It smiles, shakes your hand, and offers you a ride home. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. If those names send a chill down your spine, it's for good reason. Not every ghost story ends in death. Some begin with it and keep going. They met inside a cage, California men's colony, a steel tomb stuffed with the broken and damned. But they weren't just criminals, they were twin blades. Bittaker was the mind, cold, surgical, a man who treated cruelty like a craft. Norris was the muscle, brooding, unpredictable, a man who needed no excuse to hurt. Together, they became something worse. Inside those prison walls, they talked like kids dreaming of mischief, but their fantasies were razor sharp. They didn't want to rob. They didn't want to kill quickly. They wanted girls, teenage girls, and they wanted them to suffer. They called it a game. By late 19C8, they were both free. No one watched, no one followed. The wolves had been loosed into the hills. They bought a van, a slab of steel and secrets. It was a silver 1977 GMC cargo van, no side windows. Just blank metal like a coffin on wheels. They gutted the back, installed a bed, stacked tools in a box that would come to define their name: pliers, screwdrivers, sledgehammer, duct tape, ice pick. And of course, a cassette recorder. They called the van Murder Mack. June 24th, 1979. The summer sun had just dipped below the horizon in Redondo Beach. Heat still hung in the air like sweat on skin. 16-year-old Lucinda Lynn Schaefer was walking home from a youth church meeting, hymns still fresh on her lips. She was the kind of girl who wrote poetry, who believed in kindness, who probably thought the world was still good. She never made it home. The van rolled alongside her, slow and deliberate. Inside, Bittaker drove, while Norris crouched in the back like a jackal waiting to pounce. They offered her a ride. She said no. So Norris slid open the door, snatched her mid-stride, clamped his palm over her mouth. She was gone before anyone noticed the van even slowed down. They cranked up the music so her screams would die in the bass. Hours passed. The city lights vanished in the rearview mirror, replaced by winding mountain roads and black forest. The San Gabriel Mountains, vast, ancient, and still. The only things that stirred up there at night were owls, coyotes, and the dying. They parked in a canyon drenched in pine and silence. The only witness was the moon. Lucinda was gagged with duct tape, wrists bound in wire. She begged, she cried, she offered to do anything. But this wasn't about need. It was about control. It was about the sound of a soul unraveling. Norris raped her first, then Bittaker, then again, over and over. She asked them to kill her quickly. She pleaded for mercy. Bittaker later said she remained composed, like she thought behaving would save her. He said it made it more exciting. When Norris tried to strangle her, he panicked when she didn't die fast enough. Bittaker laughed and took over, bent a coat hanger into a loop, wrapped it around her throat, and twisted it slowly with a pair of vice-grip pliers. He kept twisting and twisting until her body stopped moving. They kept the hanger as a souvenir. Then they stripped her body, wiped away fingerprints, and hurled her off a cliff into the cold, uncaring dark. No one ever found her. Not whole, anyway. The mountains never spoke of what they saw. But they say if you hike far enough into those hills, where the air goes thin and the birds stop singing, you might stumble across something. A bit of torn cloth tangled in the sagebrush, rusted tools scattered like bones, or just the overwhelming feeling that you're not alone. You listen real close, some hikers say, and you'll hear it. Not a scream, not even a whisper, but the soft metallic click of pliers turning. You ever hear a tape hiss in the dead of night? Not a song, not static, just breath, the kind that rattles between sobs. Some say those tapes still exist, hidden in evidence lockers under lock and key. Others say they were destroyed, too awful to remain. But whether they're gone or not doesn't matter, because once you hear what happened next, you'll understand why the devil might have flinched. After Lucinda Schaefer, the monsters were hungry. Bittaker and Norris had tasted power, the kind that boils blood and poisons the soul. They didn't feel guilt. No, they felt invincible. Like the shadows themselves had opened up and given them permission. It was only 2 weeks later, July 8th, 1979, when they struck again. Andrea Joy Hall, 18, was hitchhiking along the Pacific Coast Highway. Thumb out, smile soft. She was tall, blonde, with a dreamer's glow behind her eyes. The kind of girl who trusted too easily. She was spotted near Redondo Beach. Same hunting ground, same method. The van rolled by, slow, predatory. She got in. But this time, there was something different. She grew nervous. The moment the doors locked, she could feel it. The air inside that van was thick with something foul. Not smoke, not sweat, but something deeper, like the echo of suffering. Bittaker pulled a knife. Norris held her down. They tied her hands behind her back, wrapped tape over her mouth, and drove, again, into the mouth of the mountains. This time, the sky was bruised with thunderclouds, and the canyons groaned like they knew what was coming. They parked at their usual spot, a fire road choked by dry brush and the stink of rusted metal. They raped her, then made her pose for Polaroids. Naked, bloodied, broken. And then Bittaker got an idea. He made Norris go buy beer while he stayed behind, alone with Andrea. What he did in that time, only Bittaker ever knew for sure. But when Norris returned, Andrea was gone. Bittaker said he'd let her go. But later, long after the arrests, he confessed. He'd taken her up a dirt trail, forced her to pose with a plastic bag over her head, while he snapped photos. Then he crushed her skull with an ice pick and dumped her off a cliff. Her body, like Lucinda's, was never recovered. But the story doesn't end in the dirt. Not yet. September 3rd, Labor Day. By now, they'd made it a ritual, a game of hunting and haunting. They stalked the beaches and bus stops of Hermosa and Manhattan like wolves in denim and aviators. Jacqueline Leah Lamp, 13, and Jacqueline Doris Gilliam, 15, were waiting at a bus stop in Torrance. Just two teenage girls with sun-tanned skin and laughter in their lungs. The sun was setting. They never saw the trap. The van pulled up. Friendly voices. A beer offered. A camera to pose with. That's how it started. Norris slammed the side door shut while Bittaker pulled away fast, tires shrieking like something alive. Jacqueline Lamp tried to scream. Bittaker punched her in the face, hard, broke her nose. Blood sprayed across the dashboard. They drove straight to the mountains again, always the mountains. But this time, they had a different plan, a longer plan. They kept the girls for nearly 2 days. 2 days of terror, rape, torture, starvation. They were bound, gagged, beaten, and every minute of it, every single scream, every pleading whisper was recorded. Bittaker had brought the cassette recorder. What they captured on that tape was never released publicly. Investigators who heard it broke down in tears. One veteran officer said it was the worst thing he'd ever heard, and that was after 30 years of murder scenes. The tape began with Jacqueline Gilliam. You could hear her crying. Then Bittaker's voice, calm and smooth as oil, instructing her to say things, dirty things, degrading things. She begged them to stop. She tried to call them sir, polite, like Lucinda had been. But it didn't matter. You could hear the sound of a sledgehammer hitting her elbow, again and again. The screams turned guttural. She vomited, cried. Then you hear the hiss of the ice pick sliding in behind her ear. They punctured both eardrums to deafen her, to silence the world. Then they strangled her with wire. Slowly. When they turned their attention to Jacqueline Lamp, they made her listen to the tape of her friend dying. She screamed until her voice broke, tried to run. Bittaker dragged her back and drove an ice pick into her chest. Her body convulsed, then silence. They buried both girls in a shallow grave at a remote canyon site, covered in rock and bone-dry earth. And still, they weren't done. If you walk through the San Gabriels during a full moon, hikers say you might find a rusted cassette tape half buried in the dust. They say you can hear voices if you hold it to your ear, but the tape won't play in any machine. It's cursed, they whisper, tied to the blood that soaked those hills. After Jacqueline Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp, Bittaker and Norris didn't stop. They grew bolder, louder, like they were daring the world to notice. Their trophies piled up. Polaroids of girls in agony, blood-stained tools, cassette recordings buried beneath seats. They kept the ice pick sharp. They cleaned the pliers carefully. Because for them, murder wasn't messy. It was meticulous. Their hunting grounds expanded. Beaches, parking lots, bus stops. They became shadows in daylight, smiles hiding knives. And the van, always the van. That soulless grey slab gliding down the highway like a coffin on wheels. October 31st, 1979. Halloween night. The streets of Sunland were quiet. Costumes scattered across front lawns. Candy wrappers fluttered in the wind. Somewhere far from the trick-or-treaters, 16-year-old Shirley Lynette Ledford was finishing a night shift at the local restaurant, the Stable Inn in Burbank. She didn't have a car, so she hitched a ride. Bittaker saw her on the corner, standing under a streetlight like a ghost already waiting to disappear. He recognized her. She'd once accepted a lift from him months earlier when he wasn't in the mood to kill. That made it easy. She got in. The moment the door shut, Norris lunged from the back and yanked her into the rear. Tape, rope, fists. She didn't have time to scream before her face met steel. They didn't drive to the mountains this time. No, they parked in a quiet neighborhood, right there in suburbia, and spent hours torturing her in the van. Behind rows of sleeping families, porch lights still glowing. The worst horror of the Toolbox Killers. Happened while the world slept peacefully around them. They raped her, repeatedly. But that wasn't enough for Bittaker. Not anymore. He turned on the tape recorder, and what they captured on that tape haunted every investigator who heard it. Scream, baby, scream, Bittaker taunted. His voice was calm, cruel, as if he were instructing a dog. You could hear Shirley cry out, long, soul-shattering screams. Not words, not even pleas, just raw pain. Norris beat her with his fists, then with a hammer. Then Bittaker raped her again while Norris pressed the sledgehammer against her stomach. But it was when the pliers came out that the tape became unbearable. Bittaker used them to twist and crush her genitals. She begged, sobbed, promised to be good. She called out for her mother. They shoved an ice pick through her ear, then the other, still alive. Then came the hammer. Over and over again, they bashed her elbow. The bones shattered like twigs. She screamed until her voice cracked into a rasp, then a croak, then nothing, just panting, shallow breaths, and one last moan as the hammer struck her face. They strangled her with a coat hanger, twisted it with the pliers until her breathing stopped. But the tape kept recording. Silence, then a chuckle. When they were done, they wiped the van down, dressed her corpse, and dumped her on a stranger's lawn in Hermosa Beach like garbage. She was found the next morning by joggers. Her face was frozen in a contorted mask of agony. Blood smeared across her lips. Her jaw was broken, her wrist bruised. Her body told the story the killers thought they'd erased. But this time, something changed. Someone was watching. A mistake. One man. One crack in the silence. Just days after Shirley's murder, Norris made the fatal error of bragging. He told an old prison acquaintance about the murders, the tape, the girls. He even described Shirley's torture in detail. The man, disturbed and horrified, went to police. Norris was arrested on November 20th, 1979. At first, he denied everything. But when investigators told him about the possibility of a death penalty, he cracked. And what spilled out of him was so vile, so grotesque, that even seasoned detectives stopped taking notes to hold their heads in shaking hands. He led them to the gravesite in the San Gabriels. There, they found the skeletal remains of Jacqueline Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp, their bones shattered, skulls caved in, wires still tangled in their rib cages. They found tools, the sledgehammer, the ice pick, the Polaroids, and yes, the tape. Norris handed it over willingly, as if proud. The recording of Shirley Ledford's final moments became the most damning piece of evidence in the entire case. Officers couldn't listen in full. Some vomited. Others left the room in tears. The judge later said it was the most horrific thing ever presented in a courtroom. When they arrested Bittaker, he laughed. "The little girls loved it," he said. "There's a different kind of silence that falls over a courtroom when a ghost walks in. You can't see them, but they're there, lingering, watching, whispering justice in the ears of the jury." When the Toolbox Killers were finally caught, it was as if the very air of California exhaled. The hills that had hidden their crimes for months, maybe longer, stood still, but nothing would ever make that state feel clean again. The monsters had names now, faces, chains around their wrists. Roy Norris, the one who broke first, took a deal. He agreed to testify against his partner in exchange for a life sentence instead of the death penalty. He spilled everything. Like a pipe bursting, he drenched the courtroom in blood and rot. Every detail, every scream, every violation. His voice shook sometimes, not out of remorse, but out of memory. They showed the tape in court. Not to the public, no, just to the jury, the judge, and the unfortunate detectives who had to sit through it again. One juror reportedly cried halfway through. Another became physically ill and had to be excused. A deputy said it felt like the devil was whispering in his ear. The tape lasted 17 minutes, But the silence after, that lasted much longer. And then came the Polaroids. Images of girls, mid-scream, mid-tear. One of them appeared to be Shirley Ledford, eyes glazed, lips parted like she was about to say something. Maybe help me, maybe just why? Lawrence Bittaker sat in court, stone-faced. He showed no emotion, no regret. Occasionally, he smirked. One reporter said he looked like a man watching a rerun of his favorite show. When Norris described the sledgehammer, Bittaker tapped his fingers on the table. When they described the pliers, he grinned. And when the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, he stared straight ahead like it didn't matter. 6 counts of murder, 5 counts of kidnapping, 9 counts of rape, and more. The judge sentenced him to death. But California being what it is, the appeals dragged on. Years, decades. He sat on death row at San Quentin, right next to serial killers like Richard Ramirez. He became a ghost with a pulse, a man made of ice and waiting. He filed dozens of appeals, each one thinner than the last. Claimed his trial was unfair. Claimed Norris lied. Claimed the tape was fictional role play. Claimed everything but the truth. No one believed him. He never showed remorse, never wrote an apology, never admitted wrongdoing. In his twisted mind, the girls were just entertainment. In 2005, a reporter named Christine Pelisek interviewed Bittaker. She said he was polite, articulate. He offered her a soda, then spent the interview bragging about his IQ and complaining that the media had made him look bad. There was no shadow in his eyes, no soul behind his words, just a vacuum, a void. Norris, for his part, remained in prison at Donovan State Correctional Facility. He became known as the talker, always willing to relive the past if someone asked. He gave interviews, explained the logic behind what they did. He claimed he found God, but every word reeked of performance. One prison psychologist described him as unapologetically broken. But it wasn't just the prisons or the courts that carried their memory. No, the ghosts had already spread. People began seeing things. A van, silver grey, parked outside high schools, then vanishing when approached. Some said they heard screaming in the parking lots of Hermosa Beach. One man swore he saw a girl running through a canyon, barefoot and bloody, only to disappear when he followed. The crime scenes became cursed places. The fire road where they tortured the girls. Locals say no wildlife touches it now. No birds sing there. The trees bend the wrong way. Hikers have reported finding Polaroids stuck in the dirt, blurry, degraded, but always of a girl mid-cry. The images vanish before they can show anyone else. And the worst stories? They always involve tape. Not just old cassettes. Digital glitches. Phones picking up static, then distant screams. Radios turning on by themselves and playing. Nothing. Just that low, slow hiss, like breath right against your ear. A detective who worked the case said his house was haunted for years after. Every time he closed his eyes, he'd see Shirley Ledford. Not just the crime scene photo, but the face from the tape. Frozen, in pain, trying to speak. There's no happy ending to this story. No twist, no closure. In 2009, Lawrence Bittaker died in prison. Natural causes. He was 79 years old. He never confessed, never faced execution, just slipped away into the dark, leaving behind questions, horror, and a legacy of ruin. Roy Norris died the year after, in 2020. Undisclosed causes. He was 72. Neither of them met justice. Not really. Not like they deserved. But maybe, just maybe, they aren't resting easy. Because death doesn't clean the slate. Sometimes it sharpens the echo.